The word today, no deal. That's the word today from a federal judge to the NFL. The judge has rejected the $765 million settlement of the league's concussion lawsuit. Michael Eaves is here with some of the details. No deal.
No deal.
Even though they had a deal.
They had a deal, but no deal as of right now. But that could change. Let me explain. It was the largest sports-related settlement in history, but the NFL may actually end up paying even more than that original record-breaking settlement. U.S. District Judge Anita Brody rejected the preliminary approval today, saying, in part, I'm primarily concerned that not all retired NFL players who ultimately receive a qualifying diagnosis or their families will be paid. Well, joining me now is sports law attorney Ted Corless from the Corless Barfield Trial Group. And Ted, again, we appreciate the time.
My pleasure.
Lane Phillips, a former federal judge from California, was originally appointed by Judge Brody to lead the settlement negotiations, and at the time, he called the $765 million settlement a fair deal when it was announced last August. Why then would Judge Brody come behind him and reject it?
His job was to love the settlement. He was hired to produce the best settlement he could between the parties that were negotiating. The judge's job is entirely different. And from the judge's perspective, she has to look out for the people that weren't able to participate in negotiations. In this particular case, we're talking about as many as 20,000 plaintiffs. The negotiations were essentially on behalf of one plaintiff between the parties, but here we're talking about the 19,999 other people that Judge Brody is attempting to correct.
And again, these payments were supposed to last for 65 years. At least that was the design. Well, in the wake of today's ruling, Ted, then what's the next step for both the retired players as well as the NFL?
They're going to go back to the drawing board and get a deal sometime this year. The problem that the judge had was not necessarily with the amount of money that was going to be paid to the individual players. Instead, the judge was concerned that based upon the economic models that had been produced, if more than 10% of the claimants, of the 20,000 people, 10% of that, hit the $5 million number, there was a real possibility that $765 million was simply not going to be enough.
Well, like all class action lawsuits, people can either decide to join the suit or file their own individual lawsuits. We've already seen some examples of that in the wake of the original announcement back in August. How do you think today's ruling will affect that splintering, if you will?
I think a lot of people are simply, if they were interested in going out on their own, which in this situation would be an extraordinary task for any lawyer or for any party, especially parties that have been injured in the way that they have been, you'll see a deal come back where the court is going to get the additional evidence that they need to be comfortable with the settlement, or you're going to see the number go up dramatically. As we talked about before, $765 million with an annual revenue to the NFL of $10 billion barely registers. They need to put more money out.
Yeah, I think a lot of people felt that way, even though that record amount of 765 was so substantial. Well, let me ask you this then. Let's put all the scenarios on the table. What's a greater likelihood? Judge Brody will later approve this $765 million settlement after reviewing some supporting documentation from both sides. A new settlement will be reached by the NFL, paying out even more money, maybe reaching $1 billion. Or will this lawsuit eventually end up at trial?
The possibility of trying a case like this is almost impossible. You're talking about a number of parties. You're talking about 20,000 parties. You're talking about legions of lawyers' costs that would be measured in the tens of millions of dollars. It's in the best interest of the NFL as well as the 20,000 plaintiffs to reach a deal that resolves the concerns that Judge Brody raised in her order.
Ted Corless from the Corless Barfield Trial Group in Tampa. Thanks for the time and insight as always, Ted.
Thank you very much.
So again, John, $765 million sounds like a lot, but if you're trying to cover 20,000 potential plaintiffs over the course of 65 years, that's not enough. So a lot of legal analysts, in addition to Ted, believe that number will probably get to more like $1 billion for all parties to be satisfied.
All right, Michael Eaves, thank you very much.